Hostage, a Todd Mills mystery, book 3 in the series. Arthur R.D. Zimmerman, publisher, Scribble Pub. Narrator, Eric Ost. Chapter 30. Todd couldn't sleep, even though exhaustion had bowled him over. Lying on his bed, a down comforter pulled over him. He stared at the tape on his bedside table. He'd given the original to the FBI and brought home the copy just to make sure WLAK didn't bump him from the story. And one thought kept crashing over him. Again in his mind, what the hell was Rawlins doing, with the exception of the puzzling words Rawlins had written on the envelope? Todd hadn't heard a thing, and it was like torture. This was the first night in months that he wasn't either with Rawlins or aware of his exact whereabouts, and Todd's thoughts ricocheted against every possibility, including, of course, that this was all a setup, that Rawlins had in fact been involved in Clarendon's kidnapping, and that Todd and his interview with Clarendon were a mere convenience for a devious plan. It was a horrible thought that didn't make much sense. He realized, but then what did? Certainly not Rawlins' fury and his assertion that he had AIDS. Shit, cursed Todd, flipping over as he recalled the sight of Rawlins ready to jump from the balcony. If the worst was really true, if Rawlins was sick, then Rawlins was absolutely right. There was every chance that Todd himself could be HIV positive. And Rawlins' words, "I'd get myself tested," echoed like a horrible threat in Todd's mind. Could he himself be sick? He felt perfectly healthy, had displayed no troublesome sign, such as Rawlins' chronic sinus infection. Nor could he remember any strong bout of the flu or coming down with an extremely high temperature, as many people reported after their initial infection. But shit, he could be HIV positive. Okay, there was a chance that it no longer meant a death sentence, and so maybe he was lucky in that regard, that if he had contracted the HIV virus, he was fortunate not only that he had done so this late in the epidemic, but that he was in the United States, where the new drugs were more or less available. Maybe, too, medical science had actually corralled AIDS into a category of chronic but manageable diseases. But who really knew how the disease would mutate over the next few years in reaction to the new drugs, and who wanted to live a life taking 10, 20, 30 pills a day? Anyway. Oh, shit. He was sick of this. Sick of being gay. Sick of having his life defined by a sexual act. When to him, being gay meant every bit as much as who he wanted to have breakfast with in the morning. It was just too big. All of this crap. So many issues, one after the other. He was so exhausted by the process of coming out, which seemed to go on, over and over. Every day of his life, he'd thought coming out would be just one enormous moment when you crossed some line, something that you did and took care of once and for all. But no, instead, coming out kept happening in little but significant ways every day of his life. Every time he read an article about someone like Johnny Clarendon and told someone he was incensed. Every time he touched Rawlins in a public place and some straight couple cast a judgmental eye. Every time some salesperson called for Mrs. Mills, asking if she wanted her carpet cleaned. And Todd, who used to just hang up, now said, "No, there was no Mrs. Mills, only his boyfriend. Steve, would they like to talk to him?" Shit, he wished he'd just stayed in the closet so he wouldn't have to deal with all this crap. But could he have? No, actually. That hadn't been an option, notwithstanding how it had actually come to pass. If he had managed to remain closeted, he probably would have self-imploded out of sheer stress. Yet the idea, the very suggestion that he might have to deal with another often called gay issue, that of being seropositive, made him want to jump out of his skin as he tossed. Todd saw images of Kurt. Oh Christ, was that the fate of every gay man, to be eaten alive by some virus? Stop it! He rolled over, punched his pillow. At the very least, you jerk, you have to deal with Rawlins. You love him, and you have to be there for him. And you have to be there for him in all the right ways. There's no choice. Just take a deep breath, relax. What is it, he asked himself, that you like about being gay? Not simply the company and touch of men, not the conversation and camaraderie. No, something more profound. What he liked about gay people was exactly what he pitied so many straight people for missing. The honesty, thought, Todd. Everything in this world was set up for heterosexuals. All the ceremonies, all the major events of life. Which meant that if you were indeed straight, you didn't even have to think about who you were, where you were going, what you really wanted. But if you were gay, you were forced by your very nature to see that there were many layers of many truths beyond the surface of what was presented. And as difficult as the self-search might be, that realization in the personal accounting it always entailed brought a wisdom well beyond one's years. It was something straight white people in particular, didn't automatically experience and learn, not unless there was a tragic death in the family, a struggle over substance abuse, divorce, or some kind of crisis that split open the crust of the earth. As a matter of fact, not Todd, it was those straight people, those who could see beyond the superficial markers, who were not only Todd's friends, but the people he truly admired and respected. Enough. You need, he told himself, to get even the slightest bit of sleep. If you're going to be worth anything to anyone tomorrow, you have to doze off for at least a few hours. He got up and poured himself a juice glass full of scotch, which he slammed down. He filled the glass again, downed that, and felt the burning liquid whirl down his throat and into his gut. Returning in the dark to his bedroom, he found a black heap of fur curled up at the end of the bed. "Hey, girlfriend," Todd called gently to the black cat. Before today, she wouldn't even come close to Todd, let alone beg for attention as she had done earlier this evening, nor had she ever spent the night in Todd's room. Yet here was Kurt's cat, snuggled atop his comforter for the night, taking refuge from thinking about the unthinkable by turning in to her needs. He moved quietly across his room and slipped back into bed. Todd forced himself to lie quiet still and found himself wondering exactly what girlfriend the silent witness had seen that night Kurt had died. He wondered because, of course, what had happened a month ago had just come up again this morning. A witness had reported seeing someone slip into Kurt's building. Rawlins had told Todd over the phone. So that proved, didn't it, that Kurt's death had been either murder or assisted suicide? Sure, Todd had agreed, hoping it was the second, because that at least made some kind of sense. Todd's alarm started screeching just before 5:30, and he rolled over, smashed the off button, then grabbed the remote. As he switched on the small color TV that sat on his dresser, he was surprised to look over and see girlfriend still nestled on his bed. Small miracles, he mused, and lying there he watched as the familiar logo and background music of Channel 10's Day Breaking News began to roll. A moment later, the camera focused on a desk where the early morning anchor, an attractive woman with short brown hair, was seated. "Good morning. This is Day Breaking News," she began. "I'm Carolyn Roberts, and WLAK's coverage of the kidnapping of Congressman Johnny Clarendon continues. It's been almost 17 hours since Congressman Clarendon was abducted by 3 self-described AIDS activists, just after a luncheon with Twin Cities executives. The unprecedented incident has shocked the nation. At this hour, Clarendon's whereabouts and safety remain unknown to the authorities." So nothing of significance had happened overnight, thought Todd, propping a pillow behind his head. But was the airing of the videotape still on schedule for this morning? As if answering Todd, Carolyn said, "Last night, however, WLAK's own Emmy Award-winning reporter Todd Mills discovered a videotape, allegedly made by Clarendon's kidnappers, showing Congressman Clarendon in their custody. Broadcast of this tape, which has been described as shocking, is set for 9 o'clock this morning here on WLAK TV. That broadcast will be carried live nationally, and I'm sure that our viewers will want to tune in both to hear Todd's report as well as watch this most unusual footage." In Washington yesterday afternoon, the president, who has been described as outraged over the incident, ordered the FBI to begin a full-scale manhunt. The program cut to a repeat and summary of the president's statement, then switched to a reporter who used a computerized 3-dimensional map to walk viewers through the scene of the crime. Moments later, yet another reporter showed taped footage of the mayhem that had followed the kidnapping, including Todd's first live report. The staff, Todd now thought as he watched all this, must have been up the entire night in order to put the footage and graphics together. That actually wasn't that surprising, and he jumped out of bed and ran a hand over girlfriend. He proceeded to the kitchen where he got his coffee maker going, then headed for the bathroom in a hot shower. 30 minutes later, he'd eaten some yogurt, fed the cat, put on a sport coat and tie, and was heading out the door with a cup of coffee in his hand. Traffic at that hour was light, and driving Channel 10's Ford Explorer, Todd made it to the station in record time. Less than an hour after he'd risen, Todd hurried through the newsroom, pausing only to grab a mug of coffee, and then proceeding to his office. Sometime during the night, the janitor had come in, vacuumed, emptied the trash, and raised the mini blinds on the glass wall overlooking the newsroom. Todd set down his coffee and now lowered the blinds once again. By habit, he hit a couple of keys on his computer, which brought the color monitor from overnight hibernation. A series of messages filled the screen, none of them important except the last couple from the morning producer confirming that Todd still had the green light and that the FBI concurred that the tape should be shown. This morning, Todd had, he inquired, remembered to bring the tape this morning. Hadn't he? Todd shook his head. What did they take him for around here? He wondered as he turned to his phone and checked his voicemail. The village idiot? Of course he had the goddamn tape. He'd clutched it, slept with it, not let it out of his possession. On the phone, there were 6 messages, 4 from fans who had called to express how glad they were that Todd hadn't been hurt when Clarendon was taken. The other 2 from friends, but again, nothing from Rawlins. Shaking his head, Todd turned to the small bank of video equipment at the end of his office and inserted the copy of the kidnapper's tape into the video. He plugged in a set of earphones, slipped them on his head, and punched play. As the tape began to roll, Todd grabbed a pen and yellow legal pad. How the hell was he going to come at this thing? How would his intro be? How much should he and could he say? Well, 9 times out of 10, the angle of any story and just what was said were left to the reporter. Given the circumstances, Todd wouldn't be surprised if the producer, as well, of course, as the station manager, were all over this one, and he was certain that the FBI was going to want Todd to slip in something that would have significance to the kidnappers, who would surely be watching. There was one thing that Todd was certain of, though. He didn't want this to get personal. So far, no one knew about Rawlins' scribbled note on the envelope, and for now, he was going to keep it that way. Nor would he reveal on camera that he found the tape in his car. No, if anyone, namely the other stations in town, specifically Channel 7, found out about any of that, they'd do their damnedest to turn it into some sort of story, perhaps accusing Todd of involvement. Who knew, in an attempt to spice up their own coverage. They might even dredge up Michael's murder again. So how would Todd put it this morning? Merely that he'd obtained the videotape? Could he simply leave it at that? Sure. Better yet, perhaps he should even hint that he'd worked his investigative skills to get the tape. Hell, he thought, what difference did it make? He watched the whole tape, hit rewind, then viewed it a second time. He focused on Clarendon's face, studied his comments and words. No doubt about it, the congressman was frightened. No, he didn't think they should show the last bit, Clarendon's panicked reaction, his screaming and his desperate kicking. They should stay focused on satisfying the kidnappers, whose primary goal was undoubtedly to show the world Tina's story. So, maybe they'd end the footage with the woman pulling out the blood-filled needle. At that point, they could cut to Todd, who'd then explain the rest. At least, that would be Todd's recommendation. Or would it? Watching the tape a 3rd and 4th time, he realized it might be all wrong to sanitize the thing and put his own spin on it. After all, where did his allegiance really lie? Perhaps it was better to let the world see the raw terror of AIDS. Tina's story, her pain, her indignation, her frustration, and finally her hate. And Clarendon's total lack of compassion, his cockiness, his assured righteousness, and finally, his pathetic fear. Todd halted the tape, bowed his head into his palms. God, only he knew what lay ahead for Rawlins and him. Perhaps hope, perhaps disaster. He shook his head, took a large gulp of coffee, rewound the tape, and watched it once again from the beginning. Beyond what had been said and done in that little room, there was one thing that Todd kept tripping up on. That odd humming noise that kept repeating itself through the course of Tina's story. Just why in the hell did it sound so familiar? He'd heard it somewhere before, hadn't he? He was sure he had, but where? Could it really be as simple as the sound of jets approaching the Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport? This time he ignored Tina's story, Clarendon's remarks, and all that happened. Instead, he put his hands on the earphones, closed his eyes, and focused on that sound. There it was. The first time, there the second, right? And a third, and finally a fourth. During the course of the videotape, the sound repeated itself a total of 4 times. It actually could be jets. They came roaring out of the sky that regularly, didn't they? And if so, that meant they could be holding Clarendon either in a hangar or perhaps in a house abutting the airport. Sure, that was possible. Just off the northwest edge of the runways was a post-war development of tiny houses, now slated for demolition because the noise of the jumbo jets was so severe. Could Clarendon be tied up in a basement out there? No, something wasn't right here. Todd concentrated on the noise. It was kind of jet-like, but not really. No huge roaring thrust. No explosion of power as a huge metal thing tried to force itself into the air. Each of the sounds on the tape was identical too, which didn't make a whole lot of sense. If those were jets he was hearing, wouldn't the noise vary from plane to plane? 727 to 747? He rewound the tape, played it all over again, yet again. Todd pulled back his sleeve, stared at his watch. The noise cycled on and off with computerized regularity every 3 minutes and 13 seconds. What? Todd hit the stop button, ripped the headphones from his ears. No, it couldn't be, he thought with a jolt. There was an abrupt banging on his glass door. The mini blinds rattled, and the morning producer, a young guy with curly hair, black glasses, and a permanent smile, burst into Todd's office. "The station manager's here," said Craig, who'd become a producer most likely because he had the unique ability to always be cheery, no matter how tense the situation. "So are the assignment editor and the other 2 producers." Knowing it would come to this, that they would try to meddle, Todd turned around and snapped, "Give me a couple of minutes." "Oh no, Todd. Right now. Very right now. You see, all of my bosses are here, as are my boss's bosses." "I'm busy." "My dear Mr. Mills, the FBI's here too, and everyone wants to know exactly how we're going to handle this, or more specifically, exactly what you're going to say at 9 o'clock. Shit. "Don't worry," continued Craig as he kept on smiling. "I've got a draft of something written up. They're all waiting for you down in the conference room. Let's go." "Todd, like now? Like really, absolutely right now?" He took a deep breath, grabbed the tape from the VCR, and pushed himself to his feet. No, he wasn't sure, not just yet. It could be a coincidence, a weird one at that, so he wouldn't say anything to anyone here at the station, or to the FBI, without first checking something else. But a roar every 3 minutes and 13 seconds could only mean they'd taken Clarendon to one place, couldn't it? Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold: to offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides, and in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.